Right now on Upfront.
The urgent pitch.
Donald Trump and his egregious attacks.
Vice President Kamala Harris in Wisconsin, less than 200 days from Election Day, days from former President Donald Trump now arriving, are exclusive. How do you get those voters back ahead of November? The Biden campaign's focus as Wisconsin voters demand answers on the economy.
There are a lot of issues that are at play in November.
Now, one-on-one, abortion, TikTok, anti-Semitism, fake electors, it's all ahead.
Then instant analysis. ABC News political director Rick Klein on our interview, the latest polling and what to watch in battleground Wisconsin. Plus, House drama.
I'm actually going to let my colleagues go home and hear from their constituents.
The calls to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson, the foreign aid package sailing through Congress. Now lawmakers back home. Republican Congressman Brian Stile is here, his campaign to save his seat.
The Inside First Look.
It's a destination. There's nothing like this within 1,000 miles.
Only here this NFL draft weekend inside Potawatomi's new sportsbook opening in just days and the future of sports betting in Wisconsin.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Former President Donald Trump returns to Wisconsin this week amidst his ongoing hush money trial in New York.
Trump will be in Waukesha Wednesday for an afternoon event. Despite the ongoing trial, the New York judge is using Wednesdays to hear other cases. Trump was in Green Bay earlier this month on the same day of Wisconsin's presidential primary. This week's visit comes a week after Vice President Kamala Harris campaigned in Wisconsin, her third stop to the state this year alone.
Upfront was on the campaign trail with the VP in La Crosse.
Vice President Kamala Harris arriving in La Crosse, greeted by Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul and Secretary of State Sarah Godlewski.
It is good to see everyone here.
Just some 200 days until Election Day, Harris announcing new rules in the swing state, minimum staffing requirements for nursing homes that receive federal funding, and a campaign event focused on abortion.
Hi, Madam Vice President. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Harris arriving to our interview as Wisconsin voters say the economy, immigration, and border security are the most important issues ahead of November, and by double digits, trust Trump over Biden on both. You're making the announcement here in western Wisconsin, a key part of the state, a state Trump won in 2020.
Yeah.
He's doing well here in this part of the state in the polls. I'm curious, when voters say the economy, immigration are really important to them, how does talking about health care and abortion help chip away at Trump's support?
Well, first of all, most importantly, this is about the American people and problems that need to be fixed. And one of them is the cost of health care, especially prescription medication, is just too expensive, especially for our seniors. So I'm spending a lot of time in the state talking with Wisconsinites, for example, about the fact that we finally are allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices against the big pharmaceutical companies. And for seniors, we're going to cap their annual cost for prescription medication at $2,000 a year. We have capped the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 a month. We've had far too many seniors who've had to make a choice between whether they could fill their prescription for insulin or fill their refrigerator. These are some of the things we've done. When it comes to the kinds of expenses that are weighing people down, student loan debt, we have now forgiven over $150 billion in student loan debt, including for firefighters, teachers, nurses, public servants, almost doubling the amount of debt that we've forgiven for them versus those who are not in public service. We have done the work that has been about the creation of over 15 million new jobs, including 850,000 manufacturing jobs, building things right here in the United States. So these are the issues that are an example of the fact that President Biden and I have put in the hard work to focus on significant and specific issues that have been weighing folks down. There's still more work to be done, including what we intend to do, God willing, in the second term, which includes affordable housing and making housing more affordable, not only for first-time home buyers, but for renters. What we intend to do around making childcare more affordable, and part of the conversation today was about home health care workers and increasing their salaries. They do God's work and they don't get paid enough. So we're multitasking, right?
We saw this in Milwaukee and Waukesha County play out in real time last week, this attempt to more forcefully go after Trump on the issue of abortion. Was that your idea?
Well, listen, I think that we all have to recognize that the former president, when he was president, intended that he would pick 3 members of the United States Supreme Court that would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. He did pick them, and they did just as he intended. And for the first time in history, we have seen the highest court in our land take a constitutional right that had been recognized from the people of America, from the women of America. And thereafter, in state after state, we've been seeing laws that have been passed and proposed that criminalize healthcare providers, states that literally allow for jail time. In one case, prison for life for doctors and nurses who provide reproductive health care. We have seen laws that are punishing women. We're seeing laws, including here in Wisconsin, that some would like to bring back from the 1800s. And when you talk about who is to blame, yeah, it is the former president, President Trump. He intended that he would select people who would do just what they did on the United States Supreme Court. And in state after state, you can see a direct line between what he intended to have happen and what has happened.
We're seeing more action in Congress, the foreign aid bill passing the House, the Senate next. I'm assuming the president still will sign it as he's indicated.
Yes, absolutely.
A provision in there it involves TikTok and would ban the app if ByteDance doesn't divest within a year. I'm curious, are you comfortable being the administration that signs legislation into law that could potentially ban TikTok?
Well, let me be clear. We do not want to ban TikTok, and that is not our intention at all. We're not trying to ban TikTok. We're basically saying we got to pay attention to who the owner of TikTok is and pay attention to what that presents in terms of national security issues. We do not want to ban TikTok at all.
As we talk about the foreign aid package, it highlights the intensity of Israel and Gaza. We've seen what's played out at Columbia University. I'm curious broadly your concern of the level of anti-Semitism we're seeing across the country this week and in recent days.
I am very concerned about it. And I will tell you, I'm the former Attorney General of California. And for 2 terms, I served in that position where I would regularly do a report on hate crimes. And anti-Semitism nationally has always been one of those areas where we are seeing hate that has not dissipated. And frankly, over what we've now seen since October 7, we're seeing it only grow. And I'm concerned deeply about it. I think that we have to agree that we all have to be a society that stands up whenever we see hate, wherever it is directed. And we agree that we all have so much more in common than what separates us.
At the same time, we saw some 48,000 voters vote uninstructed here in the primary in Wisconsin, a protest to the administration's support of Israel. How do you get those voters back ahead of November?
Well, there are a lot of issues that are at play in November, and the stakes are very high. And that includes the fact that, look, you can pull up a split screen. We're on TV. Just pull up a split screen. And on the one side, in President Biden and our administration, you see competence. You see a steady hand. You see someone who cares about the American people, and we have gone about solving problems. On the other hand, you can see complete chaos. The former president has openly praised dictators and said he'll be a dictator on day one. The former president has said that he will come back and essentially weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. This is someone who has said that he is proud of what he did in overturning a constitutional right of people to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do. So the stakes are very high, and I think when people get closer to November, they're not going to agree with everything our administration has done. But when it comes to fundamental values around freedom and the fact that we are standing for the right of people to make decisions about their own body, not have their government tell them what to do, the right of people to have the freedom to exercise their vote and have access to the ballot, the freedom to have access to opportunity and create opportunities for people to do well economically, I think that's what people are going to care about.
And quickly, Trump continues to focus on 2020, looking ahead to 2024. There's still a lot of attention on the fake electors across the country, including here in Wisconsin. Some have been charged, some haven't, like here in Wisconsin. On principle, do you think they should face criminal charges, the Republican fake electors?
I am a former prosecutor. I'm not going to judge anybody else's case. The prosecutors will make their decisions based on the evidence.
Vice President Harris, thank you for your time.
It's good to be with you.
With that, let's bring in Rick Klein, ABC News political director. Rick, welcome back to Up Front.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
I want to start by getting your reaction to the vice president's interview. Matt asked her about the economy and immigration, which we know are the top two issues for voters here in Wisconsin. She talked about, though, prescription drug costs rising, student loan debt, and housing. Is that a winning message?
That's the message you're going to hear from the Biden-Harris ticket. They're trying to penetrate somehow with the economic messaging, knowing that inflation has been stubborn, knowing that immigration and crime are real concerns for voters, knowing there's concerns around President Biden's age. They want people to focus on concrete achievements, and they've seen this in the polling. They know that when people learn more about prescription drug pricing, for instance, or infrastructure investments or the CHIPS Act, they feel better about the efforts being made by the Biden-Harris ticket. The key is just locking that into people's minds because it just hasn't been there yet. And you notice that the term Bidenomics sort of faded from public view. Is really the only Republicans using it right now because the perceptions of the Biden economy just don't match up with the achievements that Vice President Harris and others want to tout.
The vice president said that she was, quote, very concerned with the level of anti-Semitism that we're seeing across the country on college campuses when she was asked about what's happening at Columbia University. But since then, we've seen more arrests. We've seen more protests on college campuses all across the country. Is the administration going to have a firmer stance on this?
Yeah, it's an ugly scene, and I think it's likely to play out all throughout the spring and then the summer. Keep in mind the convention in Milwaukee and the convention in Chicago, of all places, a place that knows something about chaotic convention situations. People are going to be out on the streets and letting their voices be known. And as long as it's peaceful and legal, I don't think there's a lot that can be done or should be done about it. But when it becomes more than that, and some of the clashes we've seen on campuses kind of edge into that direction, it becomes harder for the White House to thread a needle because this is a lot of their own supporters or people that would be their own supporters, younger voters, voters of color, Democrats or independents who lean Democratic, who right now are pretty unhappy about the state of affairs, particularly in Israel. But name your issue, and you're going to see protests around it, and you're going to see concern around it, particularly among Democrats.
ABC News political director Rick Klein, always great to have your insight and analysis. Rick, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, Family Feud. House Republicans returning to Washington this week. Will some really attempt to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson? Congressman Brian Stile in studio, standing by next.